So the title of my presentation is Changing Perspective, Integrating Bodies. And what I'm concerned to do in the paper is that we have talked about the importance of holistic. We've talked about all of these wonderful concepts that we're trying to put together and have to be there for a change in consciousness, a change in how we understand the world. And so what I try to address in the paper is, are there particular ways of trying to do that in how we approach nature and how we think about ourselves. So the title is Changing Perspectives, Integrating Bodies. I'm going to focus on our body. So what happens in terms of our own relationship to nature? So these become fundamental beliefs. So when you walk outside, Pitzer here, and see a group of trees, how do you think about them? So they're nice looking. The coral tree is in beauty right now. They provide shade. Maybe they give us some fruit or nuts. They have good limbs, perhaps, for hanging a swing for kids. But if a forest manager, maybe what he would see would be what's the value in lumber feet if you cut these down, or if you remove them for grazing land for cattle, which is a big problem, obviously, in the Amazon. These are utilitarian responses about how can nature benefit us. Indigenous peoples have a very different view. Trees are alive. Trees have spirits. You can talk to them, and they respond. So an example is Malidome Some. His name, he's from the Dagra group in Burkina Faso in Africa, West Africa. His name means be friends with strangers or enemies. And that is his life destiny. So he actually has 2 PhDs, one from the Sorbonne in political science, one from Brandeis University in English literature. And he taught at the University of Michigan for a number of years. But as a child of 4, he was taken from his village, indigenous village, to a French missionary school, educated, and at 19 fled back to his native village, where he had to relearn his native language and went through an initiation experience that was really targeted for adolescents that they traditionally go through. So part of that initiation was to sit in front of a tree and to see the tree. So the first day he sits in front of the tree, and he sits there and it's hot, and you get all these wonderful descriptions, but he sees a tree, okay? He doesn't know what is he supposed to see. He comes back the next day to the same process, because he obviously was not successful. And what occurs as he's sitting there, the elders, in talking about it, say, and this is a quote from the book, whatever he learned at the school of the white man must be hurting his ability to push through the veil, unquote. Quote, can it be that the white man's power can be experienced only if he first buries the truth? So he comes back to sit at the tree, and all of a sudden, he says, I became aware that it was not a tree at all. Out of nowhere appeared a tall woman, dressed in black. Never before had I felt such love. I cannot repeat the speech of the Green Lady. It lives in me because it enjoys the privilege of secrecy. The power of nature exists in its silence. So Malidome Some went on to become a shaman of the Dagra people, but his destiny was to be, as he said, a friend to the stranger, and really to help us gain a different perspective. Recent literature in the West from foresters has begun to investigate other aspects of trees, and are arguing, among other things, that trees have reigns. They learn, they communicate with one another. Peter Wollenben's book, The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, documents communications between trees when predators are near, for instance. Trees then respond with chemical reactions to protect themselves. He describes the wood wide web that takes place within the fungi underground where the trees communicate with one another. They take care of one another. The feeding of others, trees who do not have enough nutrients, for instance. So it's an amazing description. It's a wonderful book to read about the life of trees, which makes them much more realistic to us as having a spirit, if you will, having a sense of their entities that we are in relationship and can be in relationship with. In a previous presentation, in speaking about symbiotic relationships, I used a short video, which I'm going to replay, about Yellowstone National Park, because I think it's really, really important in terms of how we, again, think about nature. Farmers in Montana, in Wyoming area, were upset that wolves were eating some of their sheep. And they ended up hunting them and eliminating them from the area of the park with negative effects that were in no way associated with the wolves. The landscape changed, animals disappeared, trees diminished in locations, and the river began to change course. These were just seen as natural occurrences. Farmers were happy that their animals were no longer being attacked. And an effort was made later to reintroduce wolves, now gone from the area for some 70 years. And what happened is an astounding teaching, if you will, in ecological relationships. And I'm just going to play it. It's 3 minutes, but I think it's incredibly important, and these are being replicated in other areas.
Exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes And as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed in it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behaviour of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilised the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was a soil erosion because the vegetation stabilised that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
So this has been repeated. So how do I get out of here? Okay. No. I'm going to need some help with this. Wait a second. What happened to this? I need to get back to my PowerPoint. Huh?
There you go.
Okay, so now I can go to the next one. Okay, thank you. So what you just saw has been repeated in other areas. There has been work done in the Pacific Northwest with reintroducing octopi, I guess, to a whole area. There's been done introducing a wild boar in Africa, regenerating. So the kind of relationship here is really, really important to understand and had a profound impact. So I think one serious question, as I started out with, as we move to an ecological civilization as a worldwide community, that how do we change our perception of the world around us? So I've given you some example with trees. Philosophically, and this is just historically, and I'm going to go very quickly through this, that when the Renaissance came to be, there were some really shifts that occurred. And it's important to see how some of this happened, if you will. Descartes, the discourse on methods, so this is happening philosophically, was talking about the circulatory system in his discourse on method. And he says, and if you don't really understand what I'm talking about, he says, just go out and get a dog, bring the dog in, cut it open, and follow along. Now, the assumption was the dog is just dead matter. And you cut it open, you can follow along with that. Now, if a geologist in the same vein were to bring a rock in and say, okay, take a rock and hit it and open it up and we'll see what's inside, we wouldn't have any problems. But that too, that was the right of rocks. The idea here is that all of this is living, and to have that notion of dead matter becomes significantly important in how we view the world around us. And what we have with human beings was the same thing. Descartes, I think, therefore I am, or I doubt, therefore I am. It's the mind. It's the mind that is what is human. And everything else is dead matter. So the body, which he argues he can't actually prove exists, but it probably does, is simply material. It's a machine. And so what I wanted to do was to really address that shift that has to take place in how we view ourselves too, okay? And what I was doing here in looking at the character of perspective was to do it through art of the same time period. This is a medieval painting, obviously religious. If you look at the figure of Mary and the baby Jesus, you know, they're very flat. The whole point of this was very different than being a so-called realistic portrait. What happens with the Renaissance, and what is key here is perspective. So that in looking at this painting, it doesn't matter where you are in the room, you're seeing exactly the same thing. And that was an incredible way, of bringing people to be able to see reality. It becomes an image that is used by Machiavelli, by all sorts of people, as to how you can have an image of the world and understand it. And it means that there is only one image available. That's the universal vision of Western science that has been imported, if you will, or exported to the world as a whole. If you look early 20th century, this is Picasso. So what you have here is a very different question, that you're not looking at a picture, you're not looking at a real person's head here, you're getting images, right? And you have to come into those images from different perspectives. So the total idea of perspective occurs that is really, really significant. And that has to do with Einstein and ultimately a change in our understanding of reality that happens in the 19th century, and I'll come back to that. So one way these changes take place is intellectual. But it's not enough to just do it intellectually. They have to become beliefs in our daily lives. They have to be what we instinctively see. Oh, and I didn't give you the next one, sorry. This one. So this is the paradigm shift, Thomas Kuhn, right? So as you look at this picture, there are actually two pictures here. So you're going to look at it, and some of you are going to initially see a very young lady, and others are going to see a very old lady. And the point, and I hope you can see both, okay? If you can't, we can come back to it. But the idea here is nothing changed. The world didn't change. The lines didn't change. It's how you perceived it, right? That's what the whole point of this is. And so as we look at what we are going to perceive, it has to be real. It's not a theory about reality, but it's the world we know, feel, and see. That's Malidome in front of the tree, okay? So some suggestions of how that can lead to ecological change. Number one is experience. So in my case, and in just my own experience here, I learned Qigong. And this was when I was doing a lot of feminist theory and everybody was talking about the mind-body relationship. They did it. So we were fortunate to have Master Situji, who is a very high-level Qigong master from Shanghai, come to Pitzer, and he stayed for 10 years teaching. And he taught in Chinese. It was a wonderful experiment in terms of doing that. And it's Qi is central to traditional Chinese thought and medicine, and it's understood as, in modern terms, being energy, matter, and information, a formative force in the universe. And the whole aspect of the movement of that is Lao Tzu talking about out of the Tao comes the one, out of the one comes the two, the yin and the yang, and out of the two comes the three, the myriad of creatures, or as it's now called, energy, matter, and information. But that's an abstract definition that is only made real by the practice. And Master C2 used to keep saying, when students ask questions, he'd say, just practice, you'll get it. What's your experience? So after a period of time, people got it. With doing the movements, one began to really feel the movement of the energy, what they call the qi, the movement of the qi, through the body. And it was very significant that there was simply no difference between mind and body. Once you felt that, you have to start thinking about what that is. So in a philosophic framework, I'm a political philosopher, anyway. The experience of an integrative body. What are we? How do we come to that notion of integration? If you go back to Plato, you have three parts of the soul. You have the head, if you will, wisdom. You've got the chest, which is seen as being courage and the virtues, and you've got the abdomen, temperance. And you can't separate any of them out. For him, if they were in that proper order, that was his definition of justice. Wisdom should dominate over the other two. The modern world has reversed that. When Hobbes argues that man is nothing but a creature who seeks power, power after power that ceaseth only in death is his comment on this, that you are using your reason, you're using your mind in order to advance your appetites. And that's why greed is such a big issue here. And so the idea of switching is really important. So it's happening in Greece, it's happening in a Western tradition, but it's also happening very importantly in the Chinese tradition. So the Chinese will talk about the three treasures, the Shen, the Qi, and the Jing, and as fundamental aspects of a person. Your DNA, the Jing, as you grow up, the Qi here looking at the center part of your body, being in that way the energetic element, and the Shen being the spiritual aspect, what we might call charisma, as Huangdi talks about it. You can see it through the eyes. You know it when you see it, says the Yellow Emperor. So they also describe colors in interesting ways. So if you're looking at auras, as we would call them, the aura around the Shen is golden, which was the theme of the metals with Plato. Around the center is silver, and the color more yellowish, more bronze-like, if you will, for Plato, but it's there. And when you think about that, the body doesn't stop with the skin. The body has movement outside of it. It has energetic forces outside of it. And unless you understand that, you don't see some of the dimensions that happen interrelationally with people and so forth. So what it comes to is this question, if you will, of thinking. And how do we think? If we're not going to separate the mind and the body, we are thinking with the whole body. It's an integrated body that is where our thoughts come from. So traditional Chinese medicine understood that years ago, and it's part of the incorporated into the 5 elements, if you will. And these 5 elements are talking about various aspects, relationships, energetic transformations. But because I can't go into it in a lot of detail here, what you are hearing from, and this is again from the Yellow Emperor, the Huangdi Neijing book, you have the yi, you have that which is conscious, which is our notion of logic. You have, and that's connected to an organ, if you will. It's part of the stomach spleen. Then you have the hun, the non-corporeal soul. And that is a part of the body that goes out of the body and comes back to the body. This can happen in dreams, it can happen in astral travel, but it is very much there, and that's part of the liver. You have the will, or the ji, which is associated with your kidneys, and the part of that is what we know about will, the willing, the concern that I'm going to do something, but it also has a yin form, which is one's destiny, to understand what your purpose is here in life. And you have the little shen, which is connected to the heart, which is the li, the virtue is the li. It's connecting to the world in which we are living with propriety and gentlemanly, as that Confucius talks about. And finally, you have the po, the corporeal soul, your breath. And when you die, the corporeal soul dies. Now, looking at that, what we are looking at is you don't think with just the mind. You are thinking with the whole body. So all of your organs are giving information to you through their activity. Now, you can continue down with looking at the emotions. There's 5 emotions. I'll just use one. Anger. Anger is connected to the liver. And there's a whole sense there about if you are angry all the time, you might want to look and see if you have liver problems in Chinese medicine. But it goes both ways. So that there's all of these aspects that the Chinese have really understood, but they're not alone. There's other cultures that have a similar breakdown.
Right about time. Right about time.
Oh, well, I've been 15 minutes already? Okay, let me just give you really quick comments. One is this happens in Western medicine too. HeartMath is doing the understanding of the relationship between the heart and the mind. This is a way of measuring it. The top one is talking about frustration, the bottom appreciation. When you have appreciation, the heart rate changes and you have a connection here. You don't think with the brain. The brain and the heart are very much involved. As we look at modern physics, and I'm going to leave Boehm, who I think is relevant, and Einstein out of this now, but what you are doing in modern science here in terms of the body is that there have been 2 really important discoveries in the last 10, 12 years. One is the microbiome, and the other is the fascia. The microbiome is your gut, and the bacteria in your gut is affecting your brain. They don't have any question about that at all. It's not separated from it at all. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's may in fact be part of the gut issue, is where research is going. The fascia is a new organ that they just discovered. Well, it's been there all the time, of course, and it's just that doctors felt it was something that got in the way. Surgeons, when they wanted to do a heart transplant or something, they had to get it out of the way. And the fascia is just, this is what it looks like, but it goes through the whole body. It's an incredible, if you don't know anything about it, look it up, because I don't have time to talk about it. And it goes through the entire body. But if you're looking at this, you might recognize that what it is now giving us some information about, which Western medicine simply refused to look at, was Chinese medicine. And here you have the meridians very much following what are fascial lines. And anybody who's interested in martial arts, you want to know there's 3 layers of this, and that's where all of that real internal power comes from. So the fascia, the microbiome, are ways in which we, in effect, have to see our body. So my argument here, basically, is that we need to, this is needling, I'll let that go. We need to change the way in which we feel, change the way in which we understand ourselves, and that will change part and parcel of what we see as the natural world around us. So quickly, I didn't get it all.